look and that everyone has the right and the potential to work. And so that kind of checks our unconscious biases, which we all have, that we need to really keep in mind and focus that regardless of who the person is, we're going to presume that they are employable in the right job with the right support. Community inclusion, employment's a primary well that people participate and contribute, to their communities, and that there's interagency collaboration. So what policies and practices are aligned across school systems, vocational rehabilitation entities, developmental disability service, and our public workforce systems. So in general, it means, again, that employment in the general workforce should be the first and preferred option for individuals with disabilities receiving assistance from publicly funded systems. Simply put, means real jobs, real wages. So why is Employment First different than some of the other initiatives that we've had across the field? Employment First has a clear government policy. It's coming from our governmental entities, and they're stating whether it's a bill, legislation, a policy, a memorandum of understanding, in some way, it is documented that employment is the first priority. It broadly focuses on all aspects of the system, not just one. And it can begin in grassroots, but ultimately it has to be adopted and implemented by public agencies via a policy in order for it to really kind of get some teeth in it and get the momentum going. 38 states currently have some sort of an official policy. So you can see on this slide, states that have employment first legislation are Alaska, California, Colorado, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Maine, Mississippi, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Texas, Utah, Washington, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. So those states have employment first legislation. The other states have a policy directive or an executive order. So they don't have yet legislation, but they do have a state policy directive or an executive order, again, stating that employment first should be the first and preferred option offered. And so those states are Arizona, Arkansas, Connecticut, District of Columbia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Missouri, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Carolina, North Dakota, Rhode Island, your state, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. You will get a copy of this slide deck, so you can go back and look at the states if you're interested. So why? I'm going to talk about why employment first and why it's so important. So employment gives everyone, including people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, an opportunity for true social inclusion and dignity. It provides a means for economic independence and person-centered practices. We in our field are somewhat complacent, I'm going to say, about asking people possibly at an annual meeting whether they want to work or not. We're not so good at explaining the what if I choose not to work, right? We're not saying you can choose not to work, but you will live in poverty unless you live with your family who has means to support you. You'll have limited opportunity to meet friends. You have limited opportunities to continue and learn and grow, right? We're not saying you can choose to not work and you can have all of these other things too. That's just not the reality for anyone in our country. It's been proven, shown through data that employment has a direct outcome of of creating better health and quality of life outcomes for people with disabilities. And as I stated in a prior slide, it's supported by both the EDA and the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act. So a little comparative slide. I know your state has phased out your 14C certificate years ago. Hooray for you all. That's amazing. Um, but as we know, sheltered work is still an option for people in many states in our country. Um, and what we're looking towards with the NEON initiative is really looking towards doing is moving from a sheltered workshop setting to competitive integrated employment. And really the differences are if people are working in a sheltered workshop, they're segregated. As opposed to competitive integrated employment, people are truly included. Sheltered workshops, I'm not going to say this is true of all, but there tends to be low expectations. You know, people are in a sheltered workshop for many years until they're deemed ready to work. And some states still pay some minimum wage. Again, I know South Carolina does not. But competitive integrated employment offers competitive pay and it's real work. So there's no, it's a slow day. We don't have work today. People are working in real jobs. So there's real work to be done on all of their shifts. So why is competitive integrated employment important? If you think about, and if I was able to engage you a little more, um, employment's in our country, you know, the first question asked of you when you meet someone new is, where do you work? What do you do for work? And then you can start to have a conversation about that. It leads to other conversations. If you were to say, I don't know, I go to a day program, I suppose it can lead to other conversations, but the real connection and kind of the equal measure is that people work. And so it also offers opportunities for relationships. Again, money is a big thing. People are seen as equal in value. Employment's the one service I believe that if you took every stereotype, excuse me, every stereotype and label that have been placed on people with developmental disabilities, and you look at work, work negates every single one of those, right? You can't be a child and have a job in our country. You can't be deemed a menace and work at whatever public entities in your community. You know, really list them out, and employment negates all of them. And it helps define who we are, as I said. You know, people tend to, or meaning people, we want to know what people do for work and do a commonality there might be there. So in a society of workers, employment is the way to true inclusion. So there's integration and there's inclusion, and we kind of interchange those terms, but it's not, they're not equal. So inclusion is when if you were to look at some circles, right? Integration would be you might be around the circle, but inclusion, you would be in the circle with everybody else, if that makes sense. So there's 6 strategies when it comes to employment first. One, again, is the presumption that individuals can work at typical jobs. All individuals, regardless of type and level of disability. Funding and resources should be primarily focused on supporting individuals in typical jobs. Again, whether a traditional job or a customized job, that our funding should be supporting individuals to work. Employment is and should be addressed as part of service planning, and each individual has an employment pathway. So we really need to shift from asking the question, do you want to work? And help people really explore what work would mean to them. Because Many of the people we support don't have a frame of reference to choose from. If you were to ask me, do you want to look for work, which is hard, or do you want to meet new friends and do all these activities? I would choose that too if I didn't know what work would look like for me. Individual employment barriers are identified and addressed. So we start with presuming everybody is employable, but we do have to acknowledge that people will need some support. So we need to identify what those barriers are and determine what those supports are going to look like, not just ignore them. There is strong justification for when individuals are an alternative to typical employment. Decision is regular revisit. And career exploration and exposure begins while individuals are still in school. So ideally, at the age of 14, students are talking about life after school and getting a job and kind of exploring what different career fields might be their options. So throughout high school, and then obviously once they enter into adult services. So a good employment first policy has a very clear definition of competitive integrated employment, right? So competitive integrated employment is that people are earning the exact same wages that their non-disabled coworkers are earning. Unless it's a customized job, the rate of pay might be negotiable, but it's still competitive. There's a clear definition of individual policy that applies to identifying the departments and agencies responsible for implementation. So employment first policies should be determining the process for people to get those employment supports. So some states, you have to be found eligible through vocational rehabilitation. Some states, you can use the home and community-based service waiver. So it really depends on what is listed in that policy as to ultimately who is going to be responsible and to fund what part of those services. There's clear oversight responsibilities. There's always goals and benchmarks. So we're collecting data to see the move from sheltered or group work to competitive integrated employment. Again, that presumption of employability will always come up. And there's requirements for informing choice regarding employment. They should have all of those things listed. So for any of you policy wonks on the webinar, you should look up your employment first policy and see if it includes all those things. So what does this mean for providers? So our traditional services, which we've had years and years and years and years since I've entered the field, were designed to meet the initial need of people leaving institutions, families, two parents working, and a need for a place for individuals to go during the day. And so different models of services were provided that met that 9 to 3 kind of need. So individuals were receiving some sort of support and families could work. And so it was really around kind of caretaking was our role. Very compliance focused. And initially, these programs were all segregated. The shift when you're moving into employment first is that it's about supporting individuals when and how they need it, self-determination, making sure that people have the frame of reference to make informed choices, and that services are going to be included in the community. And even our funding hasn't caught up with that necessarily, right? There's a wonderful video by Beth Mount, and she talks about programs versus individual services and how all of our funding works to the most part is to support the program, right? I need this many hours or this many um, slots to pay for this building, my staff, like all of my services. And so what would happen is if someone doesn't attend, then our budget kind of gets messed up, right? So that's how we've been used to billing, and that's how a lot of our funding sources are still doing it. There's change certainly, but really employment first, we can't look at what we need really for the program. We do need to look at it, but it's really about the individual and how are we going to help them meet their goals and how are we going to introduce the idea of employment in a way that really provides the opportunity to make an informed choice. And that looks different for everybody, but it's not a box that we check out an annual meeting. So for provider, what does this look like? We're leading with person-centered planning, not programs, right? So it's person needs, not program needs. We're looking at redefining staff roles. If staff have been primarily working in a, a facility-based program, their role and their supervisor's role changes dramatically, right? And so we need to, their role really shifts to an employment specialist or a community connector. And so those are a different set of skills for some people and a different set of expectations. And for staff who are used to having their supervisor, kind of relatively close, when you're out in the community, you don't have that either. And so really looking at how do we set this up so people are being supervised in the community and staff are equipped to support individuals successfully and autonomously. It's about creating partnerships with local businesses. And at the same time, we have to support the families and individuals because, as all of us know, families and individuals oftentimes will state that they have fear of the change, right? What if my child's not going to be successful? What happens if this? What happens to their benefits? So we have to make sure that we're supporting families and individuals to understand that, as well as excuse me, sharing success stories and gradual pathways that other people have successfully made. So practical steps. You have to start by building your staff capacity. Staff need to be trained in discovery, job development, and job coaching. And many providers do this differently. Some providers have job development staff and job coaching staff. And for some agencies like my own, the staff do both roles. But everyone needs to know how to do discovery. Um, we have to identify the interests of the people that we're serving. And so we have to be looking at using vocational profiles and interest inventories and providing situational assessments. Again, so people can have a chance to see and try something before making a decision as to whether or not that's what they want. And we need to repurpose our facilities. So looking at a building maybe that we own or lease, and instead of people being there all day, maybe have that as a community hub where people arrive, but then go off to work or other very community involved activities. Okay. So strategies that we work, again, discovery and person-centered planning. And when you do discovery, and I know many of you know this, you need to spend enough time with people in different locations because people, as we do, act differently in every setting, right? I'm not the same person at home necessarily that I am at work. And so we need to make sure that we're spending time with people in their home, seeing what they do really well, seeing what they like to do in their spare time, really getting to know kind of their routines. Um, I know of a woman who had been deemed not employable, and she went through the discovery process with a different provider agency. And what they found when they went to her home was that she is very organized and very neat. Like all her drawers, everything was rolled and it was all color coordinated. And she would spend a decent amount of time making sure when she put her laundry away that it was put in the right place. And so that ended up being a job for her, working at a retail store. I think it was American Eagle. And she was, would walk around the store refolding and putting the clothes away in their appropriate place. I could tell you 100 stories actually, but we don't have time. So again, we're job developing, whether it's traditional wage employment or we're looking at customized employment, which customized employment is we're working with a business and identifying their business needs through a variety of ways and questions. And then we work with that employer to tailor a specific job for an individual whose strengths and interests align with it. So as an example, I worked with a woman, Lorraine, and there was a large company, Hamilton Sunstrand in Connecticut, and Lorraine really wanted to be an administrative assistant. However, she couldn't read or write. It was very, very limited. And she had no clerical skills. Um, and answering the phone wasn't really something that we felt that she would be successful at. And so we worked with the business and we talked with all of their administrative assistants that they already had, the receptionists and admin staff, as well as supervisors and managers. And we learned that as plane parts came into the company, there was a form that had 3 pages. And so, like, the green copy went with the part, the pink copy went to the customer who sent the defective part, and the yellow copy was supposed to be filed um, in within the department that that particular part had come into. Well, the administrative staff did not have time to do all of that filing. In fact, it was one of the things that they stated when asked if there was one thing you didn't have to do, what would it be? And it was filing those forms. And they were throwing them away because they would just get too big of a pile. And so they just didn't know what to do. And so Lorraine's job was to go through each department and she would file all of those yellow sheets. So she worked full time and that was a customized job. When we're identifying opportunities and supporting people to attain a job, we need to be looking at natural supports and workplace accommodations right away. Um, and I stated earlier that it really involves partnerships with businesses, right? And so it's getting to know your local businesses and what they need and what they do and partnering with them. We're not asking them for charity. We want to find out what their business needs are and be a solution for that business. So a question which is hard, I know, in this setting, but what is one thing that your team can do in the next month to advance employment first? If anybody cares to answer that.
Let's give it a second, see if somebody will put their answer in the QA. Nothing at the moment, Janine.
Okay. Well, that's fine. We'll go ahead, and if you think of something, you can certainly put it in, and we can look at it at the end of the slideshow. So, action steps for providers if we're not supporting people to find competitive integrated employment is to really look at your organizational culture and build an employment focused culture, which takes time, but it, it can be done. Training staff and how to provide employment supports and how the rules going to change and why that's important and why that's a positive thing for them. Look at our partnerships that we currently have with voc rehab, schools, and businesses, and look at where we might need to have conversations or kind of change some of the conversations or things that we're doing. And we need to be making sure that we're collecting and using employment outcome data so we know that our services are working. So if we're not collecting the data, we don't know whether we're being successful or not successful. And I'm primarily thinking about, because we collect a lot of data, but how long does it take for someone to become employed? What is the job retention rate like? What hourly wage are they earning? And then you can turn that into an annual wage and really use that to promote employment with your legislators and other policy or businesses, whoever you want to share that with. But that adds up collectively. And you, when you share that, it gives a really good argument as to why employment supports needs to be fully funded. But we also know that most, I should say, people don't like change. And we have to recognize that it's inevitable. So if you're making this shift, or you're in the middle of making the shift, or you've made the shift, wherever you are in that realm, obviously you're going to be met with people who are fearful of change. And so this cartoon says, what if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? It won't. If we're not taking action, nothing's going to change. I can promise you. So as leaders, we need to set the strategy for change. This is why we're changing. It's the right thing to do, and this is how we're going to go about doing it. Providing consistent, clear communication, right? That this is the direction that we're going in, or this is the direction that we're in, or this is what we provide. Example, I get asked every single year to provide other services. And I'm an employment focused agency. And so, although the money looks good, I have to say no every time because our mission is to support employment. And so if I take on something else, that's not clear communication to anybody. We have to experiment and take risks. Not every single person's going to be successful day one, right? Things happen, but it's all about the dignity of risk. People learn by their failures and by their successes. And so I know my first job, if that was my only experience, I was working at Popeye's Fried Chicken, which was awful because they even made you wear these ridiculous hats back then. I certainly wouldn't still be employed if that was my option. And I wouldn't have been seen as successful. So we need to experiment. Let people know why the change and how, right? Act on things that are already in our control. We don't want to start big, right? We can look at making small changes, one person at a time, and make changes synonymous with continuous improvement. We can always improve on what we're doing. And so we're always evaluating our services, we're always evaluating our techniques, and then make changes as needed, if needed. I'd like to just put this out there because we tend to when we're making any change in our life, right? We hate having to face people's concerns, but know that the majority of people during any change are going to be in the middle of this bell curve. They're just going to wait. They're not going to be your cheerleaders. They're not going to quit, but they're going to wait. The naysayers will fall on the right of the curve. And so they're the ones saying, not on my watch. I'm not changing. This isn't going to work. Nah, 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 right? They're negative. They're not going to do anything. But the people on the left of the bell curve are the excited ones. And those are the ones you want to certainly want to focus on everybody, but you really want to pull in those staff, families, board members, community members, whoever that is, that are like, yes, let's do this. Because what'll happen is the people in the middle of the bell curve who are waiting, they will follow because they're waiting to see if it's successful or not. So we know that every single person has a talent and every single business has an unmet need. And they just might not even know it, right? And so again, whether it's a job that already exists in a company and you have the right person for that job, or you're working with a business to customize a job for someone, all businesses have the need. So our role is to really be that partner with the business and really help them look at, not go in and tell them what they need, but getting to know them well enough that you know where their pain points are. And that could be a possible fit for someone that you're working with. So we have to have high expectations. All people do much better with high expectations from those who um, are in our lives, right? Whether it's our families, our schools, our providers, our friends. And so there's been multiple studies. I won't get the school correct, but there was a study in a school that a teacher had labeled students as C level students, and a group of students were A level students. And she just randomly did that. But the students who were considered level A outperformed the students who were level C. There was a scientist, Bob Rosenthal, who, very similar story, he worked in a lab with rats, and he one night went in and put little signs on the cages that said smart rats, and some were labeled not so smart rats. And his all his employees went in the next day, and the rats who had the smart rat sign on their cage were doing things that the other rats weren't doing. And it wasn't really because they were smarter rats. It was because they were told that, they believed that, and they treated that student or the rat or whatever study you're looking at in a different way. So when we believe in someone's potential and we communicate that belief to them, they're more likely to believe in themselves and work harder to achieve those goals. So I worked with a young, actually, I say young woman, everyone's young to me, but I worked with a woman who was in a day program and was told by everyone in her life that she would never work. And I had a pilot program to teach people um, manufacturing skills so that individuals could apply for and be hired into manufacturing jobs that offered high pay and a varied amount of different positions, which, at least in my state, people with disabilities were excluded from. Um, and she went through the program, and although she did not get a job in manufacturing, she did get a job at a grocery store that she never would have done because people always told her she couldn't. But she went through the program, and the message was, of course you can, and this is how, and we believe in you. And she started to to believe too that yes, in fact, I can do this. So if we have low expectations of someone, they're less likely to perform well. That's just the reality. So ways that we can use our current day program to help with employment is looking at using our day supports as ways to do exploration and discovery. I like to say it's very intentional, right? Like every outing we go on, there's a purpose and an intention behind it. So, regardless of where you're going, staff should be discussing different work options wherever they are, right? Like, what do you think that person's doing? How do you think this gets taken care of? But just engaging them and having them to look at what people are doing that may be of interest. And so, really using that time and helping with that exploration phase. Theme-based clubs tend to work well, I've seen, as are, job development clubs. But the nice thing about a theme-based club is you can get a group of people who are interested in the same thing, have them kind of build you know, be part of building the calendar. So I'm going to use cars as an example, right? Whoever's really interested in cars, we meet at this time and this day, and we're going to talk about X, Y, and Z, and then go out in the community and explore those places that have to do with cars, and then continue to break that down into specific job tasks that someone might be able to do. I'm sorry. Obviously, volunteering and joining civic clubs. So regardless of whether someone's in a residential program or in a day program or an employment program, we are always looking to promote work skills. And so no matter what it is, how does time work, right? So building daily routines that support job readiness, right? Things like punctuality, um, grooming, communication, all of those things are skills needed for work. And so there's opportunities throughout every day to kind of build on those things. Use programs to teach communication, time management, and teamwork. So again, other skills that are really important to work. And then provide simulated workplace tasks and expectations. Always better if you can do it in the community, but if you can't, providing that simulated workplace so people can explore again and learn work skills and make a decision whether or not that's really something that they enjoy. This is a form that I have found that it's one of the best forms. It was developed by Transcend, who is located in Maryland. I will make sure you get a copy of this form. Um, but it really walks through the dreams and goals that someone has, what their interests are, it has a section for what challenges might we come up against. So what supports do we need to look at? Is there enabling technology that would help with a specific job or a specific thing in the community? It gives you an opportunity to collect all this information. It's a living document because we all learn and grow and change. Um, but it's easy to use and easy to share amongst teams. So you will definitely get a copy of this. I like this quote by Howard Clairman. Meaningful and creative shared experiences shared between people can be more compelling than all of the faiths, fears, concepts, ideologies, and prejudices that divide. And if these experiences can be multiplied and sustained over a sufficient duration of time, then any barrier that separates one person from another can be undermined and eliminated. I think that's a pretty powerful quote. So one last slide. Um, don't get stuck in excuses because it's really easy to do. And our field has been stuck in excuses for a while, and we've made tremendous headway. But we have to stop getting stuck and limiting people's opportunities because of safety. We're not going to just put someone out and say, hey, be unsafe, but we can't keep people segregated as a way to keep them safe. In fact, data shows that people who have been in the community and have had employment have less bad things happen. That's not how I want to say it, but are safer, right? More people in the community know them. There's more people kind of looking out for them. They have more resources. And when people are segregated, they don't have any of that social capital. So in fact, that group of individuals are less safe in the long run. We have to get out of our fear of rejection. It might not work right away. But again, if we're spending time getting to know the person and really matching it to the employers or our business partners, you're less likely to certainly face that. Not quite ready. I hear it all the time. We're not ready, right? Our systems were set up to help people become ready. And there hasn't been a lot of movement. Staffing, I don't have enough staff. You're never going to have enough staff. We need to repurpose our staff. Transportation, I understand it's a problem, but we can't not move forward. We need to be innovative and think creatively and maybe partner with one another to come up with a solution. I oftentimes hear that it's not a sustainable option fiscally. If you're doing employment well, the employment rate is much higher than the other home and community-based service rates. Have to check our unconscious low expectations because we all have them. So we have to be constantly checking on them. And let's stop being okay with saying people are happy doing what they're doing. They probably are happy, but can they, should they be doing more, right? Opportunities to learn and grow. So another slide for you to think of is what support do you need in your state or your organization to advance employment first? And maybe we can talk about that at the end as well. Lastly, here's some tools and resources for you. So you can look at all states, different local and state employment first policies. I would start obviously looking at South Carolina's. Organizations that are great and have information to share at sea, Associations for Persons Supporting Employment First, their website, Office of Disability Employment Policy has tons of resources, and they have manuals for providers who are moving into providing competitive integrated employment. And the Lead Center is also another great website to find information on customized employment, self-employment, school to work transition, you name it. And then there's also customized employment training options that are specifically focused on employment. And that would be the ACRE certification and the CESP credential through APSI. And that ends my slideshow. So I'm going to stop sharing.
So Janine,
Yes.
there were a couple of people who did respond to your request of what could I do, what could we do as an organization. One person stated they could continue to educate businesses on the benefit of hiring somebody with a disability and the advantage that it will have on diversity and overall with bottom line costs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely excellent. Another person indicated the feature the individuals who are currently working and maybe have them speak to their former peers of their experiences and the perks of working.
Great idea.
Yeah. And I will say there was our State Department did put out a video of somebody who had been working in a success story. And I think sharing that information is also excellent, opportunity. We've had a couple of people ask if they could get a copy of your slide deck and a copy of the form that you were referring to from Transcend. So after the webinar, I've got everybody's email addresses and we'll put that out to people if that's okay with Janine.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions, reach out to me at any point.
Now, one person indicated one of the biggest hurdles that we have in South Carolina is the fact that we are the only state in the country that vocational rehabilitation refuses to partner with. How can we get VR to become more interactive with our state office?
Yeah, that that is a barrier for sure. I think really looking at your employment first policy and then putting the right people at the table and keep the conversations going. Um, what I'll also do is I'll send a list to you, Susan, of states who have done a really good job of partnering. And so you might be able to find um, information on the internet about how that works, or contact someone and certainly say, like, how did you make that happen? Right. I know Nebraska's working very hard right now at creating the memorandum of understanding between their VR and their waiver. And so it's taken a couple of years, but they're getting here. And so now VR is accepting people, and they're starting to be the primary funding employment source, and then the waiver supports that, it braids that funding. So VR can pay for, let's say, the job development, and the waiver can pay for the job coaching or for the discovery, different things like that. But I'll send you some different states that you can look into kind of their MOUs and how they made that happen.
Thank you. So one other comment we can talk, or I'll take it out. As another hurdle is that once an individual is employed and has been working, the provider's compensation isn't always enough as it relates to even through our waiver funding. I'm pretty sure that we're referring to that.
Yeah.
And there are limits. I hate to say that in South Carolina, there also are limits that they put on how many units a job coach can provide on a monthly basis. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that collecting and sharing your employment data tells a lot. And so if you're not collecting it, or if you are, share that data, because that's how we've been able to really kind of create some change within our rates in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Um, the other thing I would say is it is a barrier. I mean, I 100% understand. But really looking at some of the enabling technologies. So, people, instead of being so staff intensive, people can still get the supports that they need. So you don't have, I'm not saying you won't need all your staff, but those hours that staff aren't currently with supporting someone, they can then take on additional job seekers.
Yeah, right.
I hope I answered that question.
Yeah. So I don't see any more questions necessarily in the chat or the QA feature. I will remind everybody that our next webinar is on July 10th. We will get the sign up out for that here next week, and people can begin to sign up for the July 10th webinar. Jean, thank you so much for joining us today, and I really appreciate your expertise on the Employment First capacity, and we look forward to our next installment of our webinar series on July 10th.
Thank you all so much. It was great
Thanks so
spending the
much.
morning with you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.